This is Meg Judge, a storyteller of the Cannon Falls Historical Museum. The Historical Museum of Cannon Falls is a place where the stories live on. You have a story. It's sacred because it's about you and about your family. And I invite you to come into the Cannon Falls Museum and share the things about Cannon Falls that you remember and document your story. I'm Miss Millicent, and I live in the Cannon Falls Historical Museum. And I come from about the 1800s. And I live in the museum where the stories live. Now you could see a picture of me when you come to Cannon Falls. I'm in the canoe on the mural, which is on the wall on Hoffman and 4th Street in downtown Cannon Falls. I came over here from the old country, and there was a crop failure, and every day the porridge got thinner and a smaller portion. There wasn't enough food for all of us in the old country that year, but we were lucky. We had a relative named Jonas Hames who lived in the United States of America in Minnesota in a town called Vesa. And Uncle Jonas sent us a letter telling us about Minnesota and sending money for the passage for me. He said there were lush fields and there was beautiful, clean water and there was enough game and there were a lot of fish. And in the woods, there was wonderful timber and there were wild strawberries in the woods. And there was an apple tree. I was the lucky one who went down to the boat, and Grandma came with me. And my grandmother put her shawl around my shoulders, and she said, "Safe journey, good luck, keep the faith, follow your dream, and do the right thing. Goodbye, Grandma." And I went across the ocean, and I danced with the sailors across the ocean on the boat. And then I got to Ellis Island. Ellis Island is the place of hopes and dreams of many people. There were people there of all colors, of all faiths, and from all countries. And they spoke all kinds of different languages. People didn't know where they were going or what they were doing. But I hooked up with a contingent from Minnesota, and I went with them on the Hudson River all the way to where I finally got into the Cannon River and got into that canoe with my little trunk, which had my other dress in it, and down the Cannon River I went until I heard the roar of the falls. And I saw the mill. And I knew that there was magic in this place. There had to be a lot of stories around the mill because the roads all came to the mill. The people came there to grind their feed and to take their wood to make lumber for houses. And I thought, Cannon Falls, this is a good place full of many stories. I wondered who I'd find here. I wondered what it was like for the people who lived here before I came, and what it would be like for the people after I leave here. It's a magical place. And now I'm going to tell you one of the stories. This is the day that made White Rock history. It's the day that Jesse James came to White Rock. Now that day, Jesse James and his gang were having a great adventure, and they rode their horses a long, long way, and they came along number 8 in Goodhue County, and they saw this farmhouse, and it had a big watering trough for the horses, and the horses were very thirsty, and the men were very hungry. And the lady of the house, whose name was Roly-Poly, because she was a fantastic cook, and she sampled all of the food she made, and that's why they called her Roly-Poly. Well, one day, her husband and her children and the hired man were washing up outside the kitchen. And they looked up, and here were 5 men on these beautiful horses with ornate saddles all full of dust and grime. And they turned in the driveway. And the little boys ran to pump more water so the men could wash up, and the horses ran for the water, and they had to pull them back so they didn't drink too much too fast. And the leader of the gang, named Jesse, said to Roly-Poly, "Could you feed us some supper? Whatever it is you're cooking smells mighty good, and we're very hungry." And she said, "Well, don't expect fancy." And Jesse said, "I didn't figure it would be fancy, but whatever you cook would be just hunky-dory with my guys and me, because we really want some supper." They went in, and Roly-Poly knew how to cook for 100 people, and her best dish was chicken a la king, which she made in her copper bottom kettle. And in those days, there weren't very many scientists in White Rock, and they didn't really know that some foods you shouldn't be cooking in a copper kettle. But the Scandinavians didn't mind, because if there was a little lye left in the kettle, they were used to it from the lutefisk. They went in, and she fixed them chicken a la king, and garden vegetables, and fresh baked bread, and apple pie, and coffee. And the little boys had hurried up to take their horses out of the barn so there would be room for those other horses to go into the barn. And they showed them where the oats were, they showed them where the hay was, and they took those beautiful saddles and put them over the work harnesses. And the little boy said, "Wow, there's a thing on here where they hang their rifles." And the little boy named Norris said, "Does everyone in the West have to wear a gun?" Mm-hmm. "Is it as bad in the West as everyone says?" Mm-hmm. "How come every one of you has 3 pistols and 1 rifle?" And one of the guys said, "Because you have to have 18 shots on the ready before you use the rifle." Whoa. And they went in to have some supper. Roly-Poly said, "You guys don't need guns here." But Jesse said, "We can't sleep unless we have our guns right by our pillow." But Roly-Poly said, "We don't have any enemies in White Rock. If the Swedes and the Irish don't get along, they just do a little wrestling and throw each other in the river." After supper, the breeze came up, and it was nice and cool, and they'd had a good meal, and they'd had some of her homemade dandelion wine and some of her rhubarb wine, and tongues were loose, and they were going to have a good time before they went to sleep. And they said, "Roly-Poly, are you a pretty good shot?" And she said, "Well, I'm not the best, but I'll tell you that the squirrels and the rabbits know they're going to get it when I get my rifle out." And Jesse said, "Do you want to see some real good shooting?" The little boys, Norris and Willard, said, "Oh, yes." And Jesse said, "Tom, come up here. You're the only one with a belly big enough for me to use. You stand sideways, and I'm betting anybody $5 that I can shoot all 5 buttons off of his vest with 5 bullets at 10 paces. That's 30 feet, boys. And he took his gun and he put his elbow on the table, set up the gun, and ping, 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 all 5 of them went off. And it was, they'd never seen anything like it. They were just dumbfounded and slack-jawed. And Jesse said, well, if I had missed, I would have given you the $5 and another $2 in case you had to bury him. Jesse asked Roly-Poly, how about breakfast? Could we be on the road by 5 o'clock? She said, no problem. We always get up that early when we have harvesting and when we have haying. And they got up early, and she had flapjacks and gooseberry jam and fried potatoes and fried eggs and ham and coffee. And they hurried up and gobbled it up when they had no table manners whatsoever. They sat with their elbows on the table and they talked with their mouth full. But they ran out and got on their horses and ran off. And when Roly-Poly took the dish away to wash it, the one that Jesse had used, there was a $10 gold piece under the plate. And in those days, you never sent a stranger away and you never expected any money. But you took all the other plates away and there was a $10 gold piece under every single plate. Well, Miss Roly-Poly paid all her back taxes and she got ahead on the mortgage, and she was one happy camper. And they were felt so rich that all the next day they just sat around drinking they had a medicine bottle that they used just for snake bites. Well, they killed the medicine bottle and the rhubarb wine, and they couldn't talk about anything else for the whole next week. And then the mail came, and the newspaper had a headline that said, Jesse James Gang robbed the Northfield Bank. And Roly-Poly said, oh, but they were such kind, nice, generous thieves. I just can't believe they were all bad. But life came back to normal in White Rock. And so Roly-Poly and her little boys and her husband went to the dance in White Rock, and she brought chicken a la king for everybody to eat, and she brought some of her good rolls, and everybody danced the circle two-step, and at intermission, of course, the Swedes and the Irish got out and threw each other in the river. And pretty soon, Roly-Poly just decided to take her kids and her husband and her hired man and her kettle with the copper bottom back home. And on the way home, they walked past the White Rock, the beautiful White Rock that rose 50 feet up into the starlit sky. It was sacred to the people who had lived there earlier. And Roly-Poly said, well, White Rock, they couldn't be all bad, but I can't believe how those rascals hoodwinked and sweet-talked me. See you at the museum. Bring me your story.